You're listening to Big World Network.
Incubus, Season 5, Episode 1. Written and read by Amanda Meuwissen. Nathan Grier was exhausted, his body drained entirely of energy from his days spent recovering from an unfortunate shotgun blast to the chest. Sleep was a welcome friend as of late. Well, some of the time. A part of Nathan feared the drooping of his eyes and what might be waiting for him in the darkness. But he needed rest, craved it. The comfort and warmth of the bed beneath him, the quiet of a room that wasn't in the hospital, the gentle touch of Sasha's fingers trailing up his thigh. Nathan sighed. His thoughts were vague, hazy. He was definitely in a bed, in a quiet room, but he wasn't surrounded by the comfort of covers. He was lying naked on top of them, displayed for Sasha to see. Nathan knew the hand caressing up his side belonged to Sasha Kelly. Of course it did. He knew the soft skin of the Incubus too well, after their night together, to imagine it was anyone else. It had been a week since their run-in with Gabriel, the seal-gear who had murdered Nathan's parents, and who had turned out, in the end, to be family. Nathan hadn't told his brother, Jim, about Gabriel being their uncle, and he hoped he never had to. Gabriel had set traps for them, using Sasha as bait, bent on ridding the world of anything not human, especially of changelings like Jim. The shotgun hadn't even been the finale, but it had been enough to put Nathan out of commission. They were all lucky to have gotten out of that warehouse alive, and Nathan couldn't help being thankful that Gabriel hadn't. When Nathan first woke up in the hospital, Sasha had clung to him, overcome with emotion and intent on confiding in Nathan his darkest secret, that he had killed the first girl he ever fed from, something he had never truly gotten over. Sasha had pleaded with Nathan not to leave him, and the words that followed had shaken Nathan more than anything that had happened to them. "I love you, Nathan." Nathan. Sasha's real voice called to him, warm breath on Nathan's face. He could feel the heat and presence of Sasha beside him now, not only his delicately trailing hand. Nathan shivered at their closeness. Sasha's touch, Sasha's affection. Nathan had grown attached to those things, but he wasn't sure if he was ready for Sasha's love. Turning toward the Incubus, Nathan reached for Sasha with an outstretched palm, but his hand sank through the air and landed on a cold mattress. Nathan's eyes opened immediately, and he found himself staring at an empty bed, just like that morning after they had first made love, when Sasha was taken by Gabriel. Nathan sat up quickly, instantly awake. He didn't recognize the room he was in. It was strangely muted, the colors all dull and without texture. There was only the bed, the walls, and a mirror in the corner. There wasn't even a door. "Fuck," Nathan cursed, running a hand through his short black hair reflexively. He was dreaming again. He was always dreaming. He tried rubbing his eyes, tried willing himself awake, but those simple tricks never worked anymore. Not when his mark was so powerful. A few months earlier, Jim had been kidnapped and taken into the Vale by Dark Fae, a passage of time Jim couldn't remember. Nathan had tricked a Dark Fae messenger into getting his brother back, but now he was marked for bounty by a yet unknown Dark She-Lord. In their hopes of getting the bounty called off before it consumed and killed Nathan, the most they had learned was that the holder of the bounty was a they, but they didn't even know what that meant. Nathan resigned himself to having to play the dream out, and rose from the bed. It was the starkest thing in the room, besides him, since the sheets were black. He was still naked as he inspected the empty walls and the space around the bed, unable to summon clothing like he might have in a normal lucid dream, which he assumed had some deeper meaning, but he didn't want to think about it. Instead, he turned for the mirror, his obvious destination. At first, his reflection looked normal, just him, clad in only skin, enlarging in the glass as he walked closer. But he wasn't completely bare, he realized. His necklace still hung neatly in place, with his father's white gold wedding ring and its intricate Celtic knots like a pendant against his chest. Over his heart was the physical manifestation of his mark, a scar made up of 3 interconnecting lines, claw marks. He cringed as he recalled the sting of the messenger's claws digging in deep, still a vivid, horrible memory. His chest was free of bandages, though Nathan knew his wounds were still healing in the real world. Here they displayed as a spattering of new scars, the marks from the shotgun pellets mixing with the scratches from Sasha's claws when he'd been set on a rampage by the powerful influence of Desire, one of the Muses, a weird sister. Nathan could still hardly believe they had survived that encounter, let alone so many others afterward, but the scars from Sasha didn't bother him. Frightening as Sasha's true form could be, Nathan found it beautiful. Slowly, he reached out to touch the mirror, filling the entire surface now as he stood directly in front of it. He touched the glass with his left palm, the one carved with a divided circle from when he'd summoned the messenger, still clear on his skin as another scar. The glass was cool, solid. Nathan wondered if he'd rather die from these nightmares, from his mark, than the other option, if a dark fae claimed his bounty and turned him over to whoever owned it. Of course, if that happened, he wouldn't die, no matter how much he wanted to. Nathan would be cursed with false immortality as the Shadow Immortal, a servant to his dark she-master, until the end of time. Nathan took a deep breath and turned his eyes away. He wanted door number 3. He wanted to find the bounty holder, kill whoever it was, and go on living, protecting his brother and Sasha from whatever might come their way. He didn't ask for much from life. He didn't expect luxury or happily ever after. He just wanted to be, to remain himself, Nathan, and be there for those who needed him. The alternative was too terrifying to imagine. Nathan looked up, straight into his own reflected eyes, and froze. They weren't what he expected. He expected slit. He'd seen that before. But even when his eyes were slit in his dreams, they were still always green. This time they were red. Red on black. Red on black. Nathan could see flashes of brilliant color and beautiful scenery that he had heard about of the more lush places in the Vale, but had never seen. There were flashes of the Fey markets, all metal and exhaust, caves tunneling to underground cities, endless trees dividing light from darkness, leading deeper and deeper into the black. And, at the heart of it all, a tower, a castle, and a flash of slit eyes, only they weren't blue or green. They were red on black. The other dream rushed forward through Nathan's mind, like it was replaying in the glass. Maybe it was. And he remembered where he had first seen those eyes. He knew instantly, then, that those eyes, those slit red-on-black eyes from the center of the darkest part of the Vale, belonged to his keeper, the holder of the bounty. Nathan's reflected lips pulled back into a smirk. Outside of the mirror, Nathan tried to pull his hand away. He couldn't. The once cool glass was growing colder, so cold it burned, like his skin was frozen in place. Pain seared through his palm, and he screamed. The reflection laughed with Nathan's voice, but the sound seemed far away, contained within the glass. Nathan looked into those eyes again, trying to keep himself upright through the pain that was slowly creeping from his palm up his arm. 2 new figures appeared in the reflection behind Nathan's double. Sasha and Jim. But it wasn't Nathan's sensitive and urgent brother, or the kind-hearted Incubus he had grown so close to. Jim's eyes were slit and amber like the messenger's, amber like they had been in Nathan's hospital room. Nathan hadn't told any of the others about Jim's moment of awakening in the hospital. His eyes like that, his expression blank, his movements so intent as he approached Nathan without answering a single plea or speaking at all. It was only Sasha's interruption that had brought Jim back to his senses. What Jim might have done otherwise, Nathan didn't want to speculate. In the mirror, Sasha was not himself either, but transformed into a larger, more monstrous version of his incubus form. His horns seemed longer and more dangerous at their points. More of his teeth were sharpened, rather than just his eye teeth bearing fangs. His wings were massive, and his claws appeared nearly twice as long. Both Sasha and Jim were smirking, just as Nathan's reflection was smirking, like they were ready to devour him. Nathan risked a glance behind him, if only to see how much truth the mirror held. But there was no sign of Jim or Sasha in the room. They existed only in the mirror, as their terrible, dark selves. Nathan jerked forward, forced to face the mirror again, as something tugged on his hand. His reflection had curled its fingers over Nathan's frozen hand on the glass, and was pulling him in. The surface of the glass didn't ripple or change. Nathan was simply being pulled through like nothing was there. Nathan planted his feet and resisted as best he could. Somehow he knew that if he allowed himself to be pulled inside, he'd never come back. This nightmare would become a reality, and he'd lose everything he knew and cared about. Sasha and Jim were laughing. Nathan's reflection was laughing as he pulled with impossible strength until Nathan's entire arm was through to the other side. Then Nathan heard it. May the road always rise to meet you. The lullaby. The one Nathan had known so well in his youth, from his mother's sweet voice, and that Sasha knew too. But it wasn't one voice or the other that Nathan heard. The song filled the air around him in both of their voices, his mother's and Sasha's, and it was almost deafening, surrounding him as he was pulled further and further inside the mirror. Nathan didn't understand if the song was a warning or the promise of hope, but he clung to it and listened, closed his eyes and listened, even as he felt himself drawn into the bitter cold of the other side. Nathan jerked awake in the back seat of the car, their newest borrowed car, as they traveled away from Minnesota and the hospital. There was no bedroom, not yet. They had only just left the hospital that morning. Deep mouthfuls of air filled Nathan's lungs as he struggled to breathe, without making any telling movements or sounds. He was laid out in the back seat, and the last thing he wanted was to alert Sasha or Jim in the front seats that he had had another nightmare. They both worried enough as it was. Nathan stared at the ceiling of the car as he worked to calm himself and remember that he was okay. The dreams were bad, and they'd only get worse, but they couldn't actually hurt him. They simply meant that his time was growing shorter by the day. Not exactly a comfort, Nathan thought. "Are you all right, Nathan?" Nathan swallowed down a yelp. When he glanced down his body, he saw that Walter was sitting in the seat with him, which resulted in Walter basically sitting through Nathan's outstretched legs, since he wasn't capable of touch. Nathan shuddered at the creepy image and tossed Walter a glare. "My apologies, but I could tell your nightmare was intense. I wanted to be able to speak with you." The one thing Nathan could appreciate about his spirit guide was that only he could see or hear him, so at least Jim and Sasha couldn't eavesdrop. Nathan raised an eyebrow for Walter to go on. "This detour is ill-advised," Walter began. "You could have months, but you could also have as little as days. I understand the need for you to rest as your wounds heal, Nathan, but is a trip to the gatehouse really the best thing? I know Alex informed you that it is currently free of other boarders, and Gabriel is no longer a concern, but the last venture there was hardly fortuitous. And I cannot go inside with you, remember." Nathan nodded. He was well aware of the dangers and the details, but they needed this. A few days to breathe, that's all he was asking. Walter frowned. "Jim is also a concern. His true awakening could honestly happen at any moment. I know he is struggling to remain in control, but your mutually ticking clocks are not a comfort to me any more than they are to you. If you must stay at the gatehouse, keep a closer eye on Jim, for everyone's sake. I do not know if there is anything we can do to help him, but while our priority is your bounty, Jim is a major concern. The very survival of the Vale is at stake." Nathan stared back up at the ceiling. He'd heard it all before. He knew the risks, he knew his life was a time bomb, and Jim's wasn't any better. He also knew that nothing was set in stone, and if Sasha really could help save Nathan, then Nathan was going to save his brother. He couldn't help feeling relieved that he would be without Walter for a few days, since the spirit guide couldn't enter the gatehouse. Nathan really wanted some peace and quiet, for as short a time as he could have it. He closed his eyes, wondering if a few minutes of dreamless sleep were even possible anymore. Which was about the time the radio blared. "Son of a bitch!" Nathan growled, jolting upright in the back seat and effectively scattering Walter's image. He was thankful he wasn't any taller, since his head did not make hard contact with the ceiling. He glared up at the front seats. The rude awakening might not have been all that bad if the radio hadn't so obviously been turned up just for that purpose, and if Sasha and Jim weren't both singing along to Life is a Highway as loudly as possible. Nathan enjoyed Sasha's voice, but Jim had no ear for music. "Seriously, what the hell?" Nathan demanded. "Be nice to the invalid. I'm supposed to be resting, remember? Freaks," he added with a grumble. Adjusting himself in the seat behind Sasha, who was driving, Nathan pointedly ignored Walter when he rematerialized beside him. Sasha continued singing along to the radio, his smile blinding through the rearview mirror, while Jim turned to Nathan with a grin. "Time for your meds, Nate. Had to wake you somehow." Nathan forced a return smile, but it was crooked, and not only because he was annoyed. He couldn't help suspecting that Jim was keeping things from him, that maybe his walk on the wild side with those amber-slit eyes meant he was starting to remember his time in the Vale. But Nathan didn't know how to come right out and ask that, not without sounding accusing. Besides, Nathan couldn't help feeling a small sense of calm every time he saw Jim smiling and acting normal. He was reassured at least a little by that. He rummaged through the small bag on the floor, filled with all the things he needed for recovery from his shotgun wound. He didn't have to ask which meds he was due for this time. His chest ached. "Either of you got something to drink?" Nathan asked. A plastic bottle was pushed back toward Nathan, and he blinked at it skeptically. "Green tea?" Nathan read off of Jim's drink of choice. "You're kidding me, right? Could you be more of a girl?" Jim frowned and retracted the offered beverage. Sasha had been driving since Nathan was last fully awake. He produced a bottle of water and passed it back. Nathan's gaze lingered on the dark leather of Sasha's sleeve, from his new leather jacket. Sasha had sulked a bit at first from the loss of his old one, but he'd struck gold at a consignment store in one of the Minneapolis suburbs, and had been able to replace the ruined jacket before they left. Nathan could admit the Incubus definitely looked good in leather. "Thanks," Nathan said, but he reached a little too far forward as he took the bottle, and had to grimace. "Damn it. Definitely time for more painkillers. I can take 2 of these things, right?" Nathan was already planning to take at least 2 as he unscrewed the cap on the bottle of pills and started shaking some out into his hand. He also had a small wound on his leg from the bullet Gabriel had grazed him with, but at least that was almost healed. "Two's fine," Sasha said, finally breaking off from singing. "Might give you a stomachache, though, and you've been complaining enough as it is," he added teasingly. "I could still kick your ass if you want to pull over, smart guy." Nathan popped the pills in his mouth and took a long swig of Sasha's water. It was still cold. "Where we at?" Sasha smiled. "Almost there. 10 more minutes and we'll be pulling into the gatehouse." Nathan nodded and turned a quick glance on Walter beside him. His spirit guide was still frowning, but Nathan didn't honor the expression with a comment. Instead, he locked gazes with Sasha in the rearview mirror. "Can't wait."
You're listening to Big World Network.